Hello. I love improvising. I think it's an understatement. But the reason for which I figure out it's so liberating while serving the muse scrupulously through the written texts by myself or for my students, I find that to start a piece that you don't know how it ends, it's extremely liberating. Of course, when you know how the piece ends because it's written, published, practiced, performed by many before you and all that, you still, like a theater play actor, go through the story, narrative, psychological trends, and you pretend you don't know. And you pretend you're surprised by this modulation, by that, I don't know, perhaps delay tactics like deceptive cadence in minor or something. You know, it's not really faked. Factually, I think every time we play through a piece that we've played all our lives, we go through this little path that is seemingly the first time. I don't think it's a make-believe. Obviously, if we didn't want to, we wouldn't do that because we would find it boring. I think those who spend their life trying to play well a piece understand that very well. It's a way to let go from experiences or from knowledge and just go through it for the freshness that it brings to you every time. And if you can let yourself bedazzle or marvel by the even the famously known sections, because it's no question about improvising the piece that you play. It's more about this kind of constant freshness, and of course the fact that nevertheless you know how it ends. It sort of spoils it a bit. But it's a very different animal than to start playing a piece and it's like the tracks are ephemerally, it's a nice image probably, I hope for you, ephemerally blown by the wind after you pass through on the sand. So the tracks are there, and then in front of you there are no tracks, behind you there are no tracks, there's just the immediate now, the fierce moment, and the flow of events comes intuitively, spontaneously, perhaps some with a little bit more of usage because of stylistic ingredients. For instance, what I just did in the beginning was something definitely in a Chopin nocturne style. Imitation, fetishism? No. Probably a little bit of, well, partly perhaps imitation for sure. It's more like immersing oneself in the music world of another composer's genre. Let's put it this way. I think it's more honest, actually. Of course, the likeness, the guessability, the recognition by the listener of a specific style should not be the alpha and omega of the improvisation. It's sort of like a starting point rather than anything more. And then it's just exploring a universe that was explored by a given other composer in a given specific genre. It's not a competition for originality. It's more about spending some time in a place you like to have gone. Landscape, smells, atmosphere, people, gazes. And then the fact that you don't know when and how it ends, I think that's very meaningful. I find it liberating. But anyway, I like to share it, and therefore, let's see if you will go for this one. The fact is that it doesn't have to fit stylistically all the bells and whistles, and it didn't. At the same time, it's pushing the envelope a little bit, saying, this is the universe I like to recreate of a Bach organ chorale transcription on the piano, but having heard music after Bach, since Bach. Probably a Busoni would have liked that, and probably he would have found it terribly bad. But that's okay. I'm not pretending to be competing for quality. I'm just exploring for the pleasure, like taking a walk in a beautiful garden that I always wanted to visit. And it's true. If you think about it, every composer created a style for which we recognize them, perhaps even occult the rest of the people who wrote like them around their time period for good or bad reasons. But in any case, we identify them, even chronologically or not. Well, for school purposes, yes. But in general, the styles are recognized more around the clutter of composers like Haydn, Bach, Mozart in the Viennese school, and then etc. But I find it very interesting to explore, not interesting, it's not the word, very appetizing, daydreaming. For instance, to explore a universe completely different from the first two. Of course, one doesn't have to improvise in a given specific style, like in this case, of course, as you recognized it, a gymnopédie or other kind of Greek title by Eric Satie, like the Gnossienne. In fact, very often I improvise out of something interior that I heard, like a reminiscence of something coming from a distant past, and I have to identify it, almost catch it before the daydream or the real dream vanishes. This ephemeral situation constantly as an image. And in that case, I don't search for a style imitation genre or composer. I just go for something that talks to me from inside me. Now, is it original per se, stylistically? I really don't know in advance, but I know that I have to say something in terms of express a narrative storytelling that has expressive emotional content. You see what I mean? It flows, it floats, it irrigates, it narrates. And in fact, the quality of being able to harness without to strangulate the spontaneity in a flow of events where you don't control the structure because you purposely let it go, since you don't have to write it or think about the structure before you start in terms of organization of spaces and restatements and thematic variations or any kind of all these things. It's just the pure pleasure, almost like a baby that hears sounds and doesn't connect them to meanings in the crib, and just enjoys the sounds that the baby makes with their own resonators to imitate the sounds of the language phonemes that they hear from the people over their crib, parents preferably, obviously. Kind of a sensorial enjoyment of the sounds more than attributing them a style, a genre, and a placement, even if they do have a reminiscence of this or that. And that's okay. I don't try to, and I can't try to be completely out of any influence of the grammar alphabet that I use in the tonal system, modally or altered versions of it. But it's a vehicle, it's not an end by itself, it's just a language which allows for a lot of innuendos and personal hints inside something that you might have heard with Rachmaninoff perhaps, or Shostakovich, or perhaps Bartók. And you can do it willingly, as I did in the earlier few examples, or you can just flow something that is a statement. I really feel it like that, a musical phrase statement, as speaking as speech is. While enjoying the sounds for the sounds that they produce, as I said earlier, for the mother tongue in the baby's crib. I think there is an essential reconnection through the improvisation to the initial pleasure of combining sounds on the keyboard when you start the piano as a child. And if you don't find any sensorial pleasure of some vibrations or resonances, consonant, dissonant, or very consonant, sweet, bitter, or whichever way you describe it. Of course, you don't have the vocabulary as a child to make analogies for specific tastes or specific artworks that you would have known, in which case it becomes more of a educated improvisation, and that is also very, very tempting. You always have genres that you prefer to others as a music lover as well as a music performer supposed to be professional. I like the supposed to be because I always find that professional sounds awkwardly. But let's say when you spend your life working on fugues of Bach, preferably, but not only, but let's say essentially, at the beginning at least. And then you sing, why is my third voice entering on G? I don't care, because it's an improvisation. I don't have to do the rules. I just adapt to these resonances that I like, so I can make a fusion of pleasure and duty. Of course, not so much duty when you make it up. Just the pleasure of the good acquaintance of voice leadings, living in good understanding. was a bit cheesy, isn't it? To finish with a Picardy third. Just a little glimpse for you of my inner worlds when I improvise, with a purpose, but also letting the sounds combine and blossom in phrases through a mood setting with a driven direction, even if it's fog at the end, because we don't know what is the next phrase or the following one and the final one. Sometimes you finish an improvisation regretfully because you feel like these flows of intuition that go through the filter of the knowledge are hopefully not too tight in the cranes, so that you have that spontaneity, which you can find again while you play the piece that you practiced. Not faked, really, so I mean it. But in an improvisatory situation, you're within it's an incredibly meaningful form of reflection. Instead of loud voice, loud sounds. It's partly a monologue and partly a dialogue with your own contradictions, or with the ideas that, or the questions that the musical phrase brings intuitively or willingly, because in a way my improvisations became, when I observed the things as they had developed in the last years, more like a soundtrack of my inner life. And how else could it be if it cannot be only effects or solutions that imitate this or that? I mean, for an example, yes, but for a purposeful improvisation that I would like to share with you, it has to be genuine and meaningful, like a composition, which just happens to be fluid and not frozen, so to say, on the text. Not just and not only, perhaps also sometimes an imitation of a style. I mean, I can say, okay, let's do. I don't believe in it much. I probably sounded like it in my interpretation of my improvisation, if I may say so, without too much redundancy of narcissism, my this, my that. Is because I think that this Haydnesque is more humorous than really meaningful. But perhaps, in a sense, an adagio or an I would say aria style andante would be more meaningful. There's something about this kind of Siciliana that reminds you of so many, but it just happens to be a variant of them, since it's in that willing style, that genre that I plunged and immersed myself, and experienced modulations, and then returned back to F minor, but trying to be not so obvious about it. Hopefully let it float and be desired, and then reappear with a sense of freshness, which is what all these bridges in the sonata forms of Mozart do so beautifully. Even Bach, but he does more with the sequences of events to the circle of fifths. Nevertheless, Haydn already hints sometimes to Schubert, who will do those bridges a lot inharmonically to make you really surprised to be so far yet so close from the neighbor, which in fact you were when you thought you were so far away. I mean, all these different stylistic effects are things that you accumulate with the knowledge of the repertoire naturally, because you play them, you hear them, you learn from them, you inhale them. At least I did. But I still find that exploring music, it's really a pathway, magic garden. If not magic, perhaps a wanderer's garden, or some kind of a place where you are attuned to all the cosmos in terms of the nature in its spiritual understanding as well. And you become a vibrating membrane, part of this cosmos, which you are anyway by essence, but when you try to express perhaps through a drawing, or perhaps through a color, or perhaps through a shape that you sculpt, or perhaps through a story that you tell through a video game, a film, a series, a book, imaginary, or perhaps self-experiences, always filled with in general, but one can also extract oneself sometimes out of fiction from some novel. Can become an opera or a ballet, or can be nothing but just a thought that you keep to yourself if you don't think that it's necessary to share with humanity, in case humanity is interested to share your thoughts, which is another problem of humility, narcissism, and true humility, not just faked. But I was just giving these examples because I find that we are sometimes in classical, officially music, not so restrictive than that for the centuries of genres and styles, but nevertheless, for most people that is one single, very big bang. It's reflective music, it's daydreaming music, it's music that makes the listener travel inner worlds, whichever of his or hers. It calls for reflection, not always, sometimes it's just very, distracting. Compared to in a way the music is telling itself what it's saying. It's the music itself, the language. And sometimes it's the reflection of the mood by essence. If you go, and as long as you have the pulse and the rhythm, more than only the harmony and the melody, you already hint for something dense. And then what type of dance? What type of step? Well, actually, that was a very nice Freudian slip, that I should stop before I become endlessly long in my verbiage, as well as in my musical monologues improvised. I appreciate you having taken the time to share some of my inner world, and I enjoyed sharing it with you.